Hello, I'm Ronnie Eldridge. Welcome to Eldridge and Company. Fortunately for us, the New York Civil Liberties Union is here to protect our civil rights and civil liberties. And they do it every day in the courts, before legislators, on our streets, and now in our airports. Donna Lieberman heads the way as the executive director, and she's my guest today. Hello.
Hi, Ronnie.
So have you spent more time out at Kennedy Airport recently than you used to? I don't know.
Nobody goes to the airport unless they absolutely have to,
right.
Except for like so many of us have been there. You know, we're there, for hours on end, days on end.
How has your work changed?
Well,
is it a whole nother world?
It is a whole other world, but the battles that we've been fighting for years still need to be fought. There's a saying that we invoke time and time again at the Civil Liberties Union, which is the battle for civil liberties never stays won. You just have to keep fighting each battle over and over and over again. This is the civil liberties version of history repeats itself.
Right.
And
it does repeat itself too often, doesn't it?
Yes, but I think that we're in a moment now, the shorter the better, that is unprecedented in the challenge that it poses to our whole way of life, our whole set of principles that are the basis of our democracy, how we think about our lives and our futures. So much hangs in the balance because every shred of progress that we have made towards equality, towards fairness, towards equity and justice over the past, 60 years is under attack. And so we're in for a ride.
I was thinking, here you finally achieved some level with, say, stop and frisk. And now it's going to be totally different, isn't it, coming from the Justice Department in Washington, not necessarily from New York.
Yeah, well, on stop and frisk, for example, that's an example of local policies that will not be necessarily changed by virtue of what's going on in Washington. There are two things to say about that, which is, one, stop and frisk is a policing practice, and it's something that was the result of racist policies by Giuliani and hostile policies from the Bloomberg administration that have been severely curtailed under Bill de Blasio. But the danger of that being increasing exponentially across the country, I think is real, is very, very real. But one of the other phenomena that we saw for decades, since the 80s and 90s, was the phenomenon of mass incarceration. And if there's one area where we have seen that the right wing is actually interested in moving in a progressive manner, it's in smart justice, because they have seen what a disaster the incarceration of hundreds of thousands of people of color and the creation of this massive prison complex, prison industry has wrought. So I think you opened up with, I think we start with gloom and doom, but actually we're hopeful that we will be able to continue to stem the trajectory of mass
I hope so, but that's certainly not the attitude that the president and the new attorney general have.
Right, and
it's going to be one of those cutting issues, isn't it, between the Republicans and this administration?
Absolutely. I mean, the coded and not coded racism that has come out from the president and his tribe, you know, during the campaign and now is really as racist as it gets. You know, the support, explicit, implicit, for, you know, the most extreme individuals and positions. You know, Steve Bannon, having any power anywhere in this country is just remarkable. But so I think that we face enormous challenges, and I worry about the progress that we've made. You know, here in New York, you know, there's a movement to close Rikers Island. Here in New York, there's a move, and there's an agreement, partly because of, you know, NYCLU litigation, to sharply reduce the use of solitary confinement in our state prisons, and I worry about being able to hold on to that. And I think that one of the challenges we in New York face is, how do we make sure that New York is as safe as it can be for all New Yorkers, for people who have lawful documents to be here, who are born here, who have green cards, and people who don't. And how do we make it safe for women? How do we protect the right to choose, which is in the crosshairs of this administration like never before? How do we protect against sexual predators? You know, one might say, like the president. You know, how do we protect kids against bullying and harassment in school? And there are lots of gaps in our progressive law in New York State.
I was
that
going
we
to
have
say,
to fill.
New York's very lucky in a way, because we are on the issues in a more forward than other states and other places. But that overall feeling that descends on people, right, is just overwhelming, it seems to me.
I think, you know, I think a couple of things, you know, have to happen, and they are happening. You know, look at the women's marches, you know, all over the country. People came out, you know, in droves. I mean, I never saw more men at a women's march
children
in
and
my
old
life.
people
It was
and young
never
people,
it was
everything.
Never more diverse,
right.
You know, all across the country. And that's, you know, that's no accident. And you know, people the following week, you know, hundreds of thousands of people across the country spontaneously came out to protest and stand up against the executive orders that targeted refugees and that target immigrants, both student people here on student visas, people with green cards, you know, so while we face like the biggest threat to our democracy in my lifetime, and bigger than anything any of us, I think, ever could have imagined, the good news is that the people have woken up, and we are, you know, we were the sleeping giant, and we're out in the streets day after day after day, and those guys can't hold a town hall without being challenged on what they're doing to destroy our country.
It's amazing also, isn't it, on the constitutional issues of just this, what's his name, Steve, the policy advisor, on Sunday, with talking that nobody can do, the president has the final word.
The notion that the power of the presidency is unreviewable by anybody. Whoever, I mean, what country are they living in? What country are they trying to build? What are they trying to steal from us? And you know, I think what we saw during the campaign was the cynical manipulation of the media, and really, I think the media just like blew it. You know, in sort of like, you know, when the media works from press releases, you know, then the truth does not come out. And I think they are going to, this administration plans to continue to govern as if it's a campaign, and as if they can manipulate public opinion. To some extent they can and they will, but I think that the power of social media to push back, and I think the real media, I think, is also
really
waking up.
Right.
But you know, they too, they can't be reactive. They have to pay attention. They have to keep their eyes on the prize and really decide what's important and report on it. And they also have to give up this baloney about balanced reporting.
Oh yeah.
You know, facts. You know, there's no two ways. The Earth really is round, and it's like does not help anybody to say, well, some people really think it's flat. Some people don't believe in climate change. Really, guys? You know, call a fact a fact. That should not take a great deal of courage or vision.
But how do you deal with when they lie? They just lie.
Yeah.
It is a whole, it's just amazing to me. We go through this day after day. You almost wake up in the morning to see what's going to happen today, right?
Yeah.
You do.
Yeah. Well, I think it's interesting.
Do you think it's going to last, this administration?
I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I think that the people of this country, everybody who lives here, you know, are not going to go quietly, and so we're not going to go. You know, I think that people are going to stand up for our democracy.
The basic question, though, comes, doesn't it, to the average Republicans? I mean, the Republican members of Congress, what's going to give them the spark? I mean, I would call it courage because I don't think they have any, but to object to what's going on.
Well, it's, you know, they're going to put their finger to the wind, and so I think it's what's important is for people who value our democratic principles to hold their elected representatives accountable. And it's time for us to also recognize that you know the ruling party has stolen power in this country. They really, really have, you know, through disenfranchising people who are entitled to vote, and through political gerrymandering. You know, the shaping of our political districts to keep Republicans in power, and Democrats do it too, but they're just not nearly as successful, is like not the American way. We have to do away with political gerrymandering.
Are there alternatives to that?
Of course.
What have they been? Commissions?
Nonpartisan.
State commissions?
Nonpartisan, not bipartisan. Bipartisan is a recipe for, like, you know, gridlock. But nonpartisan districting with presumptions of contiguity, geographical contiguity, that really matter and are adhered to. My district, you know, for the state senate goes, you know, is a narrow sliver all the way up to the tip of Manhattan, you know, to Midtown. It's crazy. And you know, people need to be, the right to vote is important and it should not be diluted. So I think that's an important thing for us.
But can you do it through the courts?
I think that the courts have thus far been very resistant, but we're working on it. The New York Civil Liberties Union is trying to figure out a way to get at this. And I think that it's important for us also to hold our elected officials' feet to the fire. You know, that's happening to a significant extent in the partisan arena. You know, Move On and Indivisible are doing their thing. I think it's really having an impact. The New York Civil Liberties Union is creating our statewide, nonpartisan, issue-based people's lobby. You know, we the people, you know, need to have our voices heard. You know, on March 13th, the NYCLU is going to Albany. We do this every other year, and this year we already have, you know, 750 people signed up. I expect a lot more people will be. You know, it's about time that the voice of the people is heard in Albany, and, you know, enough of this 3 men in a room. It is an embarrassment that New York does not provide protection against discrimination for kids in school, because there is a loophole in our state anti-discrimination law. Fix it. That's what we're going to tell our state legislators and the governor.
And just the way we vote in New York State. It's so backwards.
You know, it's like, you know, people say we would never engage in voter suppression in New York, right? We're so progressive.
We do it.
Oh, really? Oh, really? You know,
Yeah.
you have to sort of practically sign an affidavit to get an absentee ballot here.
Right.
You know, we have no early voting. That has to change. Eric Schneiderman just put
Just
in a
introduced
whole
the
array
whole-
of bills. They got to be passed. They've
Yeah.
got to be passed, you know. Go ahead, Ron.
I know. I'm so pleased to hear this passion. Well, you've always had the passion. In this recent roundup of illegal people, have we had that in New York? I mean, was it routine in New York, or was it more?
So I was at a meeting with a number of Mexican groups that work in the Mexican communities or Mexican communities in New York City just over the weekend. And while people were not calling it a roundup, it was clear that there was an unprecedented enforcement going on, and we are seeing roundups and we are seeing raids, and we all focused on the refugee issues, you know, people coming in from outside, you know, in the executive orders, and people have not focused as much on, you know, the priority setting of the Trump administration in terms of deportation. He has put every person who is living here without legal documentation at risk, and the pain and the harm, and something that he cares about, we know, is the economic impact and the economic upheaval that he is causing by these policies is just unimaginable.
How do you intervene in when somebody is just arrested and deported? I mean, how do you even know who's been deported?
Yeah, well, I mean, theoretically, the government is supposed to notify the consulate in order to get papers to help somebody get back. But the consulate wasn't even the Mexican consulate didn't get any notice over the weekend of the raids, and so it's not clear. I think the most important thing is you know, that the ACLU can be doing, and we are doing, is getting out the information to people that they have a right not to open the door to anybody who doesn't have a warrant issued by a court. And you know, people are scared, you know, and they're terrified, and so you know, you make them slide whatever paper they have under the door, and nobody has to answer questions unless there's a warrant for you. And people shouldn't answer questions. People shouldn't sign anything. People should insist on talking to a lawyer, and there are volunteer lawyers available. So making that connection is a challenge. But you know, a lot of the law firms have stepped up and are training their lawyers to provide pro bono services. You know, the governor has announced a public-private partnership. They have to put some money into that public-private partnership so that it's real, so that there are lawyers on the ground to represent people. You know, the success rate in resisting a deportation when there's a lawyer on the case is so much greater than when people go unrepresented and just sort of sign away their rights.
The woman in Arizona, she reported on a regular basis. What was that arrangement? Do we have that in New York?
I imagine, I don't know, that does happen in New York, and I wish I could say that people are not vulnerable when they're playing by the rules or trying to, but I feel like they are. I mean, it makes me cringe. I can't even think about, you know, how horrific the consequences are.
And how terrified people must be when you're in that situation.
Right, and so I think that what's really important for government, for us to demand of government, is, you know, just as, you know, the city made a terrible mistake in the municipal ID program by insisting on keeping all the underlying documents. They don't need them, you know. The cops, the police department said, we need it just in case there might be fraud, maybe. They realized they don't need it. So that by but they have changed their policies with the municipal ID program, and they're no longer holding on to the underlying documents. That's important. And city and state government has to stop collecting, any information about immigration status when they don't need it. With regard to and there are some processes with regard to even how they handle the unaccompanied minors when they're in court. There's a fingerprinting requirement. They should stop reporting when you ask for fingerprints. They should stop reporting that from DCJS to the feds. It's interesting. I often talk about privacy and government surveillance and how the government's grabbing all our cell phone data, and they have so much capacity to spy on us, and we have to sort of prevent that. And people used to say to me, "What are you worried about if you're not doing anything wrong?" Now people don't say that anymore. People understand that we can't trust government. We have to protect ourselves against government abuse. We have to prohibit them from spying on us unless they have a warrant. And there's legislation in Albany, the Electronic Communications Privacy Act, that would prohibit any kind of surveillance of cell phones and electronic data without a warrant, and that's got to be passed. There again, the problem is in the Senate, which the Republicans have stolen by virtue of political gerrymandering.
Yeah, it's breathless. If people pay income taxes, that doesn't give them any kind of right, does it?
You mean taxation without representation is tyranny? You mean?
I don't know. I mean, it just, this poor woman in Arizona paid her income taxes.
Yeah.
But it doesn't have any meaning, does it, if you're not here on a, I don't know.
Having paid taxes is
it's always,
not a protection, and not having paid taxes apparently can get you right into the presidency.
Yeah.
But I think that what we in New York can do is hold our state accountable, and make sure that when our state says we're a sanctuary city, they mean it. That our state agencies, that our cities do not turn over any information to the feds without a warrant, and that we're not collecting stuff so that we're in a position of having to either break the law or respect people's rights. We have to make sure that we train all city officials in respecting individual rights, and we have to make sure that there's recourse and accountability. Our schools, are supposed to prevent bullying. They're supposed to protect kids against bullying, but there's never been a whole lot of resources devoted to that. We have to do that, and we have to start giving our teachers the support they need, and we also have to make it clear, our schools are sanctuaries, right? No ICE. No ICE. ICE never comes to our schools. They never come to our hospitals. They never get access to our social services agencies. Those entities have a job to do, and that's supporting people, helping people, teaching people. And if they want to do their dirty business, they can do it on their own time. But the city will not be part and parcel of that. And the same thing is true for the state. Recently the state of New York adopted some really robust guidelines for the state police. The state police used to pull people over on traffic stops upstate and interrogate them about immigration status. It was a little Joe Arpaio operation going on. Well, that has stopped. The governor has stopped that from happening, and all the state law enforcement entities, right, are prohibited from interrogating people about their immigration status, in the course of routine traffic stops or routine enforcement operations. That's really, really important as well. So one of the, I could go on, Ronnie.
It's great. I'm not even joining you. I'm listening.
So one of the dangers that we see, and there are reports of this up in Hamburg, New York, just the other day, that you know, there are these agreements that the federal government pushes local entities to enter into to cooperate, to have their local law enforcement cooperate and serve as agents of ICE immigration. And you know, the ACLU filed lawsuits against that, and because what ICE was doing was giving out detainers saying, we're interested, we want this person, but not a warrant. And localities were held liable for actually violations of civil rights. You can't hold somebody without a warrant, you know, but they were doing it. And so there has been a resurgence of communities entering into these 287G, they're called, agreements to have local law enforcement serve as agents of ICE. New York City has not and will not do that. Our corrections department has not and will not go back to that, at least not under Bill de Blasio.
Are there other cities?
But there are other places where it's happening, and the NYCLU is launching a major effort to prevent cities, to discourage cities and localities from disrupting the lives of their people by turning, you know, every police officer into
So you're developing a very strong grassroots following.
Yes, yes.
Because you can't do the work alone, right?
Right. Well, the NYCLU has 8 offices around the state, and we're developing our people's lobby to do the grassroots work that is necessary. That's demonstrations, it's district visits with Congress, congressional representatives, and state representatives.
Yeah.
We have a lot of work to do, and we're doing it. So
Good.
we're at nyclu.org,
right.
And we're the state affiliate of the ACLU. We're working hand in hand, and there's so much to do.
Thank you. We've come to the end, but people can look at the website. They can find where the regional offices are. They should write or communicate with their friends and relatives who live in the different areas, right?
Yes,
and
now
join and
yes,
participate.
now is the time to stand up proudly as a card-carrying member of the ACLU.
It's always been something to be proud of.
Yes.
Now it's to be feared by the other people, I think.
Right.
Thank you so much, Donna Lieberman.
Thanks, Ronnie.
Thank you. We at CUNY TV always like to hear from our viewers. So if you have any subjects you'd like to explore or people you'd like to hear, please let us know. Write to us at CUNY TV, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10016, or go to our website, cuny.tv, and click on Contact Us. We look forward to hearing from you.